everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be showing you 3 ideas of how to create some fabric style DIY Valentine hearts. I'm going to be sharing an idea of how you can create a chenille look of fabric using some yarn, and I'm going to be using some felt to create a pretty little flower to go on the top, as well as incorporating some slow stitch stitches to add just a little bit more detail to these fabric hearts. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration called Love is in the Air. We have 2 hosts today. We have Brenda with Rustic and Lace DIY, Krista with Krista's Crafty Life. Now you're going to find the links to their channels down inside of this description box, as well as a playlist for all of the other creators who have joined in today's collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels, as well as click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something fun for your Valentine season. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I can't wait to show you these creative ideas. DIY Valentine number 1 is created from a lightweight canvas style material. There's not a wrong side or a right side to this material, but I did need 2 pieces that match, so I just folded my material over and traced around my image using a pen called a friction pen. Friction pens erase with heat, so it works great for tracing these patterns. Once I had the heart cut out, I wanted to create a fringed edge around this piece. This fabric fringes easily, so I was able to just take it into my hands and roll it up. And that's how I created that pretty bit of fringe all the way around. The next material I was going to be using was felt. Felt's a great crafting material to use. It comes in a variety of colors and is fairly inexpensive, especially if it's an acrylic blend of fabric. You can easily find it in any of your craft stores. A good tip for cutting felt is make sure your scissors are super sharp. It's going to make an easier job of cutting this fabric. To create my size of heart, I just freehanded it and cut it until it looked like it was about right. Once I had my shape done, I wanted to create a blanket stitch around the outside of this turquoise heart, and red was going to be a perfect complementary color to do this in. To create the blanket stitch, you have a knot in one end of your thread, and I'm using a twisted thread for this, so it's only one thread. It's not a DMC thread, so I didn't have to separate it. But I created the knot, came through the back of my fabric, looped it over my fabric, came through the hole I just went through, pulled my thread, but before I pulled it all the way tight, I went to my right-hand side and went underneath that loop I just had created. And that's going to create a little bit of a knot at the top. Once I have my knot there, I went to the back of my fabric again, over just a little ways, went through my loop at the top and pulled it again, creating that band across the top to create that blanket stitch look. I'm right-handed, and these instructions are how to do it right-handed. If you happen to be left-handed, definitely search on YouTube for a video on how to create this stitch left-handed. I'm new to stitching and only know a few basic ones, but I've been able to create quite a few pretty things just knowing the basics. I wrote on my fabric with the friction pen again to create the lettering. I was going to be using the back stitch to create the letters. To do a back stitch, you basically take a stitch, come underneath, but instead of going forward with your stitch, you go back into that last stitch. This is a great way to make a straight line or a curved line and works perfect for lettering. By having the letters drawn in the friction pen, I'll be simply able to add the heat and the lines will disappear. It makes it so much easier to be able to stitch around the letters once they're traced. To connect my 2 pieces together, I was going to be hand sewing them together and using a running stitch. You can start out with the technique of where you do stabbing, where you go from the back to the front to the back to the front, or you can do the running stitch where you simply weave your needle up and down from the back to the front and gather your fabric on your needle as you go and create a little bit of a running stitch that way. If your fabric is thin enough, you can easily do this, and it makes a quick go of creating a running stitch and connecting my 2 pieces together. I chose to use hot glue to attach the felt heart to the front. I probably could have stitched this piece on before I stitched my 2 hearts together, but I didn't think of that until it was too late, so I thought hot glue would work just fine. I just made sure that the pieces weren't getting glued together from the inside. I took some polyfill and went ahead and did a light stuffing of my heart. I didn't need a lot of polyfill in there, but just enough to make it a nice little size pillow. Once it was stuffed and I had sewed the edges all the way shut, I was able to take a look to make sure that heart was glued on there all the way down. I added a little bit more at the top and at the bottom, and that way to make sure my heart was all the way attached. The final embellishment piece for this was going to be buttons. I started with a red one, and then once I had the red one glued on, I stacked on a heart-shaped one in the color of coral. I added some red thread to the center of that button. I always like the way it looks to have it finished off with a little bit of thread inside of my buttons, and the red thread worked perfectly to match that blanket stitching and the stitching around the heart. We'll take a closer look to see what this looks like in the final review. On to DIY number 2. The fabric I was using for this piece is a tablecloth from the Pioneer Women's collection at Walmart. I drew my heart on and then pinned my pieces together. I was going to be sewing this piece on my sewing machine. I was going to be using the inside of the print of the fabric in the end for this one. I wanted more of a subtle look, so that's why I'm pinning the pretty sides out. Once I had my piece sewn and I turned it inside out, I wanted to go ahead and create a chenille fabric look to this piece. I was going to be using yarn and hot glue to create this look. I followed the heart shape with the hot glue, and then I tapped the yarn inside of the glue using the finger protector. You definitely want to use a finger protector or some sort of silicone piece when doing this project. Once I got back up to the center, I connected my pieces, and I go ahead and I clip the yarn. I go down just a little bit, and again repeat that process going around the heart. Each time you get to the top, you clip your pieces and connect them, and start another way around the heart. In the end, my pieces did end up being slightly wonky, but it's okay. It still looks good. I end up adding a bow at the end, so it kind of camouflaged the wonkiness of it all. But even if it did turn out slightly wonky, I'm okay with wonky. I wanted this piece to have a fringe edge too, so I went ahead and I took my scissors and I clipped the edges, making sure not to clip too deep to cut into my stitched area. Once I had that done, I just took it and I really roughed up the edges, and it created a really pretty frayed edge. I could have maybe done this before I glued all the yarn on, but it still worked this way. One way by doing it this way, you're definitely going to find out which yarn piece isn't connected with the glue. This piece was going to be a pillow, so I began the stuffing process. I always like to use smaller pieces of fill and then push them in. To get to the far areas, I often use the end of a paintbrush to get all of the stuffing up into the corners. I needed to go ahead and stitch my piece together. I just used a simple little running stitch to connect the two pieces together. For a finishing detail for this piece, I was going to be creating a felt flower. This blue shade of felt matched the blue inside of the fabric perfectly. First, you start with a square, and then I was going to be rounding my edges off to create more of a circular shape. This particular flower is made with a spiraling of your fabric and gluing as you go. So you start with a square, round off your corners, and once the corners are all rounded, that's when you go ahead and cut your spiral. Start narrow on one side, and then you start your spiraling, that's hard to say. But you go ahead and keep on cutting. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. You just keep on cutting all the way to the center, and when you get to about the size of maybe a quarter, you go ahead and stop, and you want to leave that little bit of a quarter size at the bottom. Take your tail, fold it over, add a dot of glue there, fold it in on itself, and then you start the spiraling process. I'm having a hard time saying that word together. Spiraling process. You can use that tail at the bottom too to help spin your piece, but you just add some glue, fold it over on itself, and spiral it in. And as you get to the end, it's helpful to put the glue more towards the bottom of your piece so it flares out better. You can either take that tail and cut it off or just tuck it in there, add some glue, and then glue that little button piece down at the bottom, and that holds your piece all together. And it's a pretty little spiraled shaped flower. I was going to be creating a simple bow using a combination of fabric and ribbon. It's just a simple style of crisscrossing the fabric or the ribbon across each other. It's just nice to have a variety of color and textures. I especially like the idea of using the pink rickrack in this project. I thought it matched the idea of having that old chenille bedspread type of idea look on the heart already, and the rickrack just kind of added to that look. To tie off the ribbon, I just used some more of the same yarn that I had created the front part of my heart with. I fluffed it out, and then I just used some hot glue and attached it onto the front. Added the felt flower to the center. And then as the very final finishing touch, I had a pearl that was from an old necklace, and I ended up gluing that to the center of the flower. On to DIY number 3. I was going to be creating a pennant for this piece, and I'm using little scraps of fabric attached to felt using a French knot. I'll show you how to create a French knot on this scrap fabric. You start from the back, come up with your needle, wrap your thread around your needle about 3 times, and then you pull it back through to create your knot. Let's do it again and I'll explain it a little bit better. Start at the back of your fabric, come to the front with your needle. Once you have your needle through, in your left hand, hold your thread tight, wrap it around your needle about 3 times, slide your threads all close together, and then push your needle through the same hole you just came up through, making sure to keep your tension on your thread as you're pulling it through. And that's how you make a French knot. I did 3 of those French knots in each side of my pennant pieces of fabric, and then I cut them into a triangle shape. I had drawn the triangles using my friction pen first, so I had an idea of how big I wanted them. And then once I had them cut out, I used my scissors to hold the fabric down because that heat tool is hot and it'll burn your fingers. So use something to hang on to it, or you could have a small iron and that would erase your marks as well. The fabric for this piece I'm using is a kitchen towel fabric that's been already coffee stained with instant coffee. I'm going to be pinning my pieces and cutting on the line just as I've done with the rest of my pieces. This piece I'm going to be gluing it together with hot glue. I used 2 colors of embroidery floss to stitch my little pennant pieces together. You can already see on my heart where I've already done some stitching patterns. I created some X's here and there to create a little pattern in the background of my heart. For this piece, I was going to be gluing my edges together. When I was putting on the glue, I wanted to make sure I was going to have enough area to be able to cut a fringe around my whole piece. So I wanted to stay about 1/4 inch away from the edge. It's a little hard to gauge when you're gluing because when you push that glue down, it does spread out. So it's just a general guess, but that's what I was going for, is to make sure I had enough room to be able to clip my edges all the way around to make a little bit of a frayed edge. When gluing your piece, you just glue a little bit at a time. So put on a little bit of glue, put your pieces together, and press them together. When making these little pillows, I always need to remind myself to leave an opening. Truth be told, there's been more than once that I've actually sewn a whole thing together and realized you need an opening to make a pillow. Oh well, true story, but that's the way it is. For this one, I did leave an opening and lightly filled it, and then at the end you have to add the glue. It does help to kind of stretch that piece out a little bit flat and then press it down. For the pennant for this piece, I was going to be adding glue to the edges to glue the pennant pieces down, and I decided that each little pennant was going to be helpful to add a little bit of glue underneath each one so they didn't twist and turn. Once I had the pennant attached, I took my small scissors and I clipped little clips all the way around my heart. Once I had those edges clipped, I went ahead and frayed them a little bit more with my fingers and my hands by rubbing them back and forth. I wanted to create a little tag or a little sign for this piece, so I used some stamps and I put on the words XOX on my stamps, and then I used some hot glue and attached it to the bottom. Took a little bit more of that fabric and added a small piece to the top, and then I glued a pink button on the top with some red thread in there. We'll get a closer look at the end to see what these all look like together. My studio is getting pretty full with so many of the wonderful items that I've created for this Valentine season. If you're interested in creating some of these other items, take a look at my playlist underneath Valentine DIYs. I wanted to say a special thank you to Krista and Brenda for hosting today's Valentine collaboration. Definitely check out their channels and click that playlist so you can see all the other ideas shared today. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Well, thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll come back, and next time you'll create right along with me.